Hey, it's Jonathan McHugh. We're back again for Friday's Beat, our podcast with Loyola University and OffBeat magazine. We get to interview all sorts of amazing people from all different musical walks of life. Today, we're lucky enough to sit with producer, engineer, recording engineer on the move, Mark Howard. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good.
Welcome back to New Orleans, man.
Thank you. Thank you for
I know
having
you've
me.
had a love affair with the city for a lot of years.
Yep.
You currently reside where?
I live in a little town in California called Topanga Canyon. So it's just kind of between Malibu and Santa Monica.
It's a beautiful spot.
A really nice kind of place to...
And how long have you been there?
I've been there for, I guess, maybe over 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah, so I bought some land there. And
how far up the canyon are you?
Oh, I live on Topanga Skyline Drive, which is
like in its 7th or 8th?
Right, yeah, just past that, but all the way to the top.
So you're up there in the mountains.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I have the last property on the road, and
wow.
It was the neighbors probably didn't want me to buy it, so they told me that's where Charles Manson lived.
Wow, they tried to scare you off, huh?
Yeah, tried to scare me off, but I bought it anyways because it was like, and so I kind of lived off the grid up there for a while, and now I kind of
got yourself some power.
I got power and I got water, and
nice.
It's like it's nice because I travel a lot, so I was trying to find a situation where I could, not have to pay rent, and so I just bought a property, put an Airstream there, and
wow.
built a container home kind of.
Interesting.
And so I was kind of a gypsy in a way.
Right. Did you actually build the house since then or no?
No, it's still kind of like
container
container house.
I love those things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
My friend has one out in the desert out in Joshua Tree.
Oh, yeah.
It's got like a container resort.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, there's lots of people who just kind of jumped into on that.
So you go from the highest high mountains overlooking, by the ocean to below sea level.
Yeah.
In New Orleans here. So let's get back into it. So your first path to New Orleans, how did you end up coming the first time?
The first time was I was working in a studio in Canada and in a place called Hamilton, Ontario. And that studio was kind of like owned by a record producer called Daniel Lamois. He didn't own it at the time that I was working there, but he kind of started it, him and his brother Bob. And so I ended up working there as a T-boy. And so Daniel had just finished a record with a small band from Ireland called U2. And he came back to Hamilton to start his own solo record. And so I got put on night shift with him, and we kind of hit it off. And he liked how fast I worked and could get things done without him asking me.
Mm-hmm.
And so we kind of developed this kind of like not having to talk to each other. He could just look at me and I know what he's talking about. And so
you had that thing.
We had that thing, and so it works great.
Called shorthand.
Yeah. So he's got that that kind of thing where he gives you the eyebrow or whatever, and so you know what to do. And
right.
so then I was like 21 years old, and I was pretty green, and he asked me if I would come to New Orleans and help him make a record with this band called the Neville Brothers. And of course, I'd never been to New Orleans, and I didn't know who the Neville Brothers were. And so I took his offer, and the owner of the studio said to me, he says, if you leave, then you can't come back to your job. It was like, you got to make that commitment. And Dan said, it's only for 6 months. And so I said, I'll take it. I'll try, my career.
When you're 21, you do that.
Yeah, you can do that kind of stuff. And so I kind of flew down here. I guess it was spring of '88 maybe. And so Dan met me here. It was in the French Quarter, and he put me up on St. Anne Street. And it was, bizarre for me. Like Bourbon Street. I'd never seen anything like that before.
Not like Hamilton.
No.
Not like Hamilton, Canada, Ontario.
So it was a little shocking, but, I rolled with it. And so I met with Dan the next morning after I arrived, and we met at a coffee shop. And he says, I'm here for 2 days, and then I'm going to go to England to work with Brian Eno. And I'll be gone a month, and when I come back, I want you to find a place to make this record with the Neville Brothers, bring all the gear in, bring the console in from England, bring the tape recorders down from Canada, get everything else from, Manny's in New York, or, just
Now, why wouldn't you just use a studio? Why set up and go through all this work to find real estate, get it approved, bring in all this equipment? Why not just use a recording studio?
It's because you have, when you go and work in a studio, you got to walk past the reception first of all, and then you walk into, it's not as private, and it's on the watch. You got to keep looking at time all the time. And if you're in a house, there is no time limit. We start work when we wake up, and we work until we go to sleep, and so that's the way it works. And so it makes for, a great situation where your money goes a lot longer, further than what it would in a recording studio.
Right, the clock's not ticking.
Yeah, and you don't have that pressure.
Right.
And by working in a house and not a studio, you kind of like, you break these kind of boundaries of when you're in a recording studio with glass booths and stuff like that. You're behind that booth, and I'm just trying to like convey a little message to you, like, try a different key or something like that, And so, I got to run out to the studio, open your door, and tell you what I want, but this way, where I rent a house or a theater or a castle or whatever it is, and I can just say, hey, can you just play your guitar a little quieter? You're pushing it a little too much, and so it's easier communication. You're not behind glass. You don't have headphones on. You're playing to a set of speakers that sounds natural, like a live gig, and you perform better. You put on a set of headphones, your pitch goes crazy a little bit. It's like it's hard to sing in tune. At least, you have the musicians in the room with you, and your communication to them is a lot better. And the way I work off of performances. I don't work off perfection. I work off of how good it feels and how, the vibe. And
so in this Yellow Moon situation, you didn't know the band, you didn't know the city. What was your first way that you helped find a studio or a place to build a studio?
It was kind of like introductions to different people, and so they turned me on to things. As I was telling you before about this woman called Lucy Burnett. And so
Shout out Lucy.
Yeah. So she's kind of like she had this amazing French Quarter balcony, and
yes,
she has parties, and so we kind of like went over for a party and start talking. I was telling her what I was looking for, and she goes, I know the guy for you. This guy David Zulkine, he does all the places, and so she sets me up with him, and it was great. He took me around and showed me a bunch of places, possibilities to, make the record, and some of them were cool, but some other ones were kind of scary. Like one was kind of like a home for children that was like abandoned, and it was like steel beds, and it was like
some weird voodoo to it.
Yeah, it was a bad scene.
And you opted for the place right next to the Columns Hotel, so you always have a place to have a cocktail.
Well, he lived right across the street, and I met him there, and then I looked over and I saw a for sale sign on this building. It's called Emila Court, and so it was owned by an old, I guess cotton was like the big thing here.
Yes, in the South it was.
And so he built this for his 5 daughters. So Emila Court is the first letter of each one of their names.
Interesting.
And so it was 5 floors, and all the daughters got their own floors.
So it was vacant.
It was vacant. And so I said to David, will you approach the people that own it and see if I can make a record in there? And I said, I know they want to sell it, but the market is bad right now, and they're not going to sell it.
Right.
They're not going to sell it in the next 6 months. And I said, look, I'll give you all the money up front, and let us in there for 6 months, and then we'll leave. And so you'll make $20,000 or whatever it was.
Right.
And so they took it, and so I put the studio on the 2nd floor, and Charles Neville lived on the 1st floor, and Daniel Lanois lived on the top floor, and I lived in the studio on a futon on the floor in the back. And I got a crazy story where we had this housekeeper working for us, and so her name was Miss Alberta, And so she goes, I ain't going in Mr. Mark's room. And
Mr. Who?
Mr. Mark.
Mr. Mark. Your room?
Yeah, my room. Because I was told that if you put a ring around your bed of boric acid, it will stop the cockroaches going onto your bed. And so I had this like circle around my bed, and so she went to go in my room. She goes, he into voodoo.
Well, that's after your experience of going to, as you look for places, have the cockroaches fly at you, right?
Oh yeah. So it was like a warehouse, and I opened the door, and it was dark, and I didn't know. And as soon as I put the switch on, they just kind of like, there was a mound of them over the sink, I guess because it was water, and so it was like. And I'm not, used to seeing these kind of insects.
Oh, yeah.
They're kind of creepy.
Serious.
It's definitely a horror movie.
Yeah. So okay, so you guys get in there, you start making the record, you meet the Nevilles.
Yep.
What is your take on the Neville Brothers at this point of their lives, their career?
The thing about them is, if you go see them live, they're fantastic. It's like, oh, it's pumping. But to take that energy that happens live and put it on a record, it's a different thing. So we took a different approach of them playing live, and we were working with using a technique where they would do these kind of hand rhythms on percussion instruments, and there's a song called Voodoo on the record.
Oh, you must have put voodoo on me. Oh, you must have cast a spell.
Great song.
And yeah, beautiful, but it's got this really kind of cool, sexy groove. So they played a wood block, tambourine. We had like a bottle, a Perrier bottle that Cyril would play a drumstick on, and so we just kind of record like maybe 15 minutes of them doing this, a groove, because they're great. When you see them live, Aaron's up there with the cowbell. it's kind of sexy and stuff. And so we recorded it at fast speed, and so we play back at a halftime. So recorded at 30 IPS, and you play it back at 15 IPS, and it creates this slow.
A little swamp.
That's where the swamp came from.
So that's a playback situation.
Yeah, and so
record in one speed, playback in another.
Yeah, and so that's now the speed, and so. With that speed, we put a slide guitar on it that Brian would play, and then they would sing to that track. And so, it was Cyril, I think, that sang, he sang Voodoo. And, the brothers would sing behind him, and it was all done in our bedroom, which was supposed to be the control room. And I had a whole another living room and dining room that I had set up the drum set and the organ, and we never recorded that. We just recorded everything in the bedroom because it was more direct, so we didn't have to leave the room and stuff like that. So that's kind of like how it started, and a lot of it was built like that.
And what was the A&R process? Because obviously you have very distinct voices and personalities. Cyril's voice of kind of super funky, up-tempo. You have Aaron with the beautiful
gorgeous,
Hollis Brown, and then you have RT, kind of the Papa Funk, the king of it all. How do you go back and forth and decide A&Ring what's on? And my friend, our mutual friend Patrick Clifford, was the A&R guy for the label. I don't know how much he was involved versus just them picking what they wanted. How was that process done? Yeah,
it was good. He'd show up with a margarita and say, I like it.
That's my
man. They were not involved. There was no real... I think there was a guy called Morty Wiggins
he was the manager.
Yeah, he was there, but no management or anybody was allowed in the studio.
Yeah,
we just made the record what we liked and put it together that way, and so it was we were doing what we thought was right for them, or Dan. It was his concept, and so that's kind of like how it came about.
And do you remember any particular songs being chosen and why?
I think at the beginning, when we started the record, all the songs have been chosen. So, I think it was between the band and Dan that, they made a list of songs. And so a couple of covers, we did God on Our Side, which is a Bob Dylan song, and Hollis Brown.
Beautifully sung by Aaron.
Yeah, and so they were great. And then I think it was a Link Ray song, Fire and Brimstone. and that was saying
That's art.
That's art, yeah, that's art. And then what was the other ones?
Healing Chant.
Healing Chant. Now, Healing Chant was an instrumental that kind of came out of, they've all kind of like had a rough life, and they've all been to prison, and they've all, stuff like that. So they would tell these stories, like of this woman, Black Diamond Pearl, and they were like they were prison stories, and
right.
and so we would do some of that to these kind of grooves, and so one of the grooves became like this instrumental for Charles, and
that's Healing Chant.
That's Healing Chant. And Charles won a Grammy for that. That's instrumental.
Right,
yeah, it was
Grammy Award-winning Yellow Moon album,
yeah,
right?
exactly. So yeah, it was kind of like one of the. I didn't expect it, but it was kind of cool.
And then, so what was the structure with you? Was Malcolm Byrne on that record?
Malcolm was hired as the engineer.
Okay.
Ended up doing singing with the band and
really?
and playing keyboards and some sounds and stuff like that. And then at one point, Brian Eno had came in.
Right, talk about that. Brian Eno flies in the middle of the session. Like so he had a relationship with Lanois, Brian Eno,
yeah, and
who's one of the legendary producers of all time.
Yeah, so Dan tells me that this guy Brian Eno's coming. I said, okay. He goes, can you go pick him up at the airport? I said, all right. And I didn't know what he looked like. And
Pre-internet.
Can't
look anybody up.
You can't look anybody up. And I was just like people coming off the plane, and I was like, Brian. And then suddenly Brian comes off and we make eye contact, and it's like, and so I'm driving this like 1965 black Cadillac, and we get in it, and his first words to me were, "Can you take me to Storyville?" I'm like, Storyville? Yeah, we can go by there, and Storyville
hasn't been there since 1905
40 or whatever. It was like it was. So I didn't know how to tell him, so. I took him to the French Quarter and drove down Bourbon Street. Yeah, and so,
close enough.
But it was not that far away where Storyville was, So we made our kind of cruise through there, and then onto St. Charles Avenue, and then to the studio, and so.
Which is, by the way, right next to the Columns Hotel.
Oh yeah, there's a beautiful Columns Hotel, and that's where Brian stayed.
He did.
Yeah, so that's he stayed there. And
that was convenient.
Yeah.
And how long did Eno stay for, and what kind of contributions did he do to the record?
It was kind of cool for me because Dan had asked me just to work with Brian by myself with him, and so we would work in the mornings, and so Brian
Eno's a morning guy.
Yeah, and so Brian Eno would have kind of like a treatments that he would take, like a piano, and then he would treat it through a bunch of effects, then lift the piano sound out, and then suddenly you would get this beautiful scape of a sound. And it's kind of like based off of his ambient records. That's how he's discovered that. So I was learning, that's how you
learned
do
some techniques from that guy. I mean,
yeah.
hold on, this is your first real record in America.
Yep.
Okay? And you're with Daniel Lanois, who's just come off of U2, and then Brian Eno flies in. And so here you are, how old are you?
I'm 21.
And you're like with two of the greatest producers of the modern era.
Yep.
And so you just got to be and you're in New Orleans,
Yep.
right? You got to be with the Neville Brothers, and it's got to be just an thrilling experience,
Oh,
right?
yeah, it's coming at me left and right, all kinds of stuff. And, Brian he's the master of this keyboard. It's called a Yamaha DX7, and like most studios had them, and they were kind of corny sounds.
Right.
But he'd gone in there with all the algorithms and changed them, and so he had all these weird kind of cool sounds that were kind of like ambient pieces. And there's a lot of it on Yellow Moon, and so he had this one sound. It was kind of like an insect sound, and so he played like a little melody on it. And I had the window open, and I guess they're cicadas or crickets.
Cicadas are loud.
They're really loud. So he plays this melody of these insects off the DX7, and the cicadas follow the same melody. I go, Brian, did you hear that? He goes, yeah. I said, try a different melody. He tries a different melody, and they copy him again.
Come on.
So he's talking to these insects, like with this keyboard. It was pretty wild.
Wow.
And then we... Again, we use the technique of slowing stuff down, and I got these, like wind chimes, they're bells and stuff like that. So I got we went over to Aaron Neville's house one day, and I saw them, and I just took them off. I said, "Can I use these?" And he let me take them, and so Brian took them, and I held them, and he just would hit certain ones, and we recorded them fast. And so, like on God on Our Side, you'll hear these bells. It sounds like a church.
Right.
And so by treating those and putting these effects on it, it created this kind of beautiful tone. And, you know, with Aaron singing, you know, over these tracks, there's like magical. It's like happening right there in front of you, you know? You go, oh my God.
And so did you never even had you heard Aaron Neville up until this point?
I had no idea who he was.
So this is the guy, obviously, who's literally one of the greatest voices of all time.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the
Yep.
joke on Aaron Neville, he could sing the phone book and kill it,
Oh,
you know?
oh, yeah.
And so it must be just to land as a Canadian kid thrown into this thing with one
Yeah.
of the greatest New Orleans bands of all time.
Yeah.
It had to be spectacular. So how far into the process did you know that you had something special as a record, that you guys had really made something special?
It wasn't until, you know, like the way it works with records is like you're working on them, so it's kind of like a blinders almost.
Head down
like
thing.
you're just kind of like concentrating on, and it's hard, you know. You got to come up with something to say about the track or how to improve it. So your mind is working all the time. So it's exhausting, you know, to work, you know, 12, 16-hour days and you know, be as excited about the whole thing. And so yeah, it's a process that you go through but when you realize it's years later almost, it's like when you hear, you know, like with the Bob Dylan "Oh Mercy" record, you know, I thought, oh, okay, well, it came out and I never heard anything of it, and it never really did anything at the time. But now it's a classic record, you know. It's like and so is the Nevilles, you know. Like these are records that I started to notice with the Neville Brothers that as I kind of carried on working my career around the world, I got the opportunity to work with this Pakistani singer called Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan.
Mm-hmm. Amazing.
And so I had just finished the Neville Brothers record, and so he had come, and I met him in England and stuff. And I told him, I said, I just finished this record with the Neville Brothers. And he goes, what? You work with the Neville Brothers? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I want to hear it. I want to hear it. He turned into this, like, you know, excited. He was so amazed. I didn't know he would know who the Neville Brothers. And
well, they're on that world music tree, right?
Yeah.
New Orleans is kind of on that world music tree that he's on, but at very different branches.
Oh, yeah.
But there's overlap with a lot of it.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and it happened to me again. I was working at Peter Gabriel's studio, and he was doing these things, they were called record weeks. And he was inviting people from all over the different, around the world to come in, musicians and stuff, and bring in all the big top producers. And so Dan was there, and so it ended up, Mike Large was the manager there, and he asked me, he said, Mark, will you work with this band from South Africa? And it was in the big main room and stuff like that. So I said, yeah. So it was this guy called Lucky Dubé, and he was like the Bob Marley of, you know, of South Africa, and, you know, people in Jamaica. He's up there with
Sure.
And so you know, they were just flown in from South Africa. They were exhausted, and I was trying to talk to him, you know, explain to him how we're going to do this, and he didn't want to talk to me. And so it was, you know, I'm not sure if it was, you know, because of color or whatever, because I was a white kid, but again, I said, hey, Lucky, you know, I just finished this record with the Neville Brothers, and you know, I wanted maybe see if you wanted to hear it, or he goes, you worked with the Neville Brothers again.
His tone totally changed.
Oh yeah, and became my best friend. And
isn't that interesting how music can be that credibility stamp?
Oh yeah, yeah,
It connects people like that.
Yeah, exactly.
So great.
Yeah, and I made this song called Dracula with him, and it became a big song for him.
Really?
So, yeah, so I was kind of proud of that.
All right, so Yellow Moon comes out, gets a Grammy. I'm at the radio. I'm at work, and now I'm at A&M Records now, and I'm able to help get this record on the radio thanks to my friend Ed Bradley.
Yeah.
I got Ed Bradley to host a premiere party for the record, and that takes off. And then, but you know, it's not like the Neville Brothers become household names, but they get bigger tours. The record gets a Grammy. They get bigger press, and they get out there in the world.
Right.
And obviously that helped out you because it's a credibility stamp.
Yeah.
It's not like just working on any artist. This New Orleans thing has credibility. I tell our students here at Loyola, if you're a New Orleans musician, you have better credibility than almost anywhere.
Yep.
For the base of the structure. So from there, what are your next couple records after the Lucky Dubé? Like you're now doing things. You're working with Lenoir exclusively?
No, I'm kind of on and off, and so I work on his solo records and stuff like that. So I did after the Bob Dylan record, "Oh Mercy," I finished Dan's. It's called Acadie, and it was like his first solo record.
Right.
And then so that was kind of like, I thought that it was the end of the New Orleans period after we finished that, and then this house became available in the French Quarter, and it became
Kingsway.
Became this house called Kingsway. Yeah. And
Where's the name come from?
well, Dan's French, and he picked an English name for the studio, which was kind of odd. But I think it was to do with something that he had, an account in England. He probably from working over there, he needed to have, and so one of his accounts was called Kingsway, and we just used that for that building for tax.
PJ Morton Jazz Fest party. I'd never been there before.
Right.
And I brought Patrick Clifford back.
Yeah.
I didn't tell him we were going.
Right.
We went right from Jazz Fest to, I walked him in there, and
Okay.
he's like, wow, I haven't been here in a long time.
Yeah.
So talk about what you had to do there to get that thing rolling.
Yeah. Well, I had saw the house before Dan even considered buying it, and it was just shambles. The roof was a hole in the roof, and water. It rains here a lot, and so everything is rotten and smells, and it's like, yeah, it's awful. And carpets were 70s shag, and it was just, and so I told him it's not worth it. It's not the amount of work would take too long, and I think somebody had convinced him that he should buy it, and it was like $250,000 I think he paid for it, which is nothing, and then he drops it in my lap, okay, you just do a quick fix up and we'll, So I knew this guy from the Jazz Fest crew, a guy called Jimmy Mack, and he helped me. He brought in a crew of people, and we did a quick month renovation on it. Had the roof patched, had to have beams put back in, and it was a slate roof back then, so we put on, shingles just to patch it up for then. And it was hard.
What year are we in now?
This is 1990.
Okay.
I think we moved in '89 in the summer, and then it became 1990. Yeah, and so I got it all, workable bedrooms, and and I had to go around and find beds and go to auctions. And
so you're like you're not.
I'm
just,
a guy
you're
with
not just
many
making
hats.
music.
No.
You're just like you're furnishing places and fixing up places.
Yeah, and buying Cadillacs and motorcycles. Wow. So it looked kind of strange. A bunch of like long-haired hippie guys, with bikes and all these people coming in.
This is on the corner of Esplanade and
Esplanade Charters.
Esplanade and Charters.
Yeah.
Right, amazing location. Right out of the French Quarter.
It was the biggest family dwelling in the French Quarter.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a pretty big place, and there was a lot of nice tile work in there, and I think just before Dan had taken it over, Disney was filming a movie in there, and they stole all the beautiful sconces off the wall. Those, Hollywood people.
Those Hollywood people.
Yeah, they fell off the wall. We never saw it. So yeah, so we lost some beautiful things, before we even got in there, but yeah, and then so once I got it, I got a phone call. There's an equipment broker, this guy called Dan Alexander, and he's the guy where you get a beautiful console from, or microphones, and so it's kind of like a broker for musical stuff. And so this console came up for sale in New York at the record plant. So what happened was their lease was up, and they had to be out of this building by tomorrow, and so I had to fly up there. And so I'm about to fly up there, and I'm at my girlfriend's house, and so I told her I'm flying in the morning, and so I get up in the morning, I go in the bathroom, get cleaned up, and my whole face is just full of like pimples and throbbing, and I got chicken pox from her kid, and I had to fly to New York. I get on the plane, and the stewardess comes over, and she goes, "Would you like some She walked away as soon as she saw my face. And so I get to New York to the studio, and nobody would come by me. I had to dismantle this whole console all by myself, put it all in bubble wrap, write on each one. This is channel 1. This is, and so, and there was a bundle like this of wires coming out of the back of it. I thought, well, how am I going to take that? And I just thought, well, I'll get a Sawzall. And I just cut all the wires, and I had to have them rewired once I got back to New Orleans. But there was no way.
That was the only way to get them out.
It was the only way to get this thing out, and it was built. The console was put in there first, and they built walls around it. So the console needed to be tipped up on its side and jimmied through this doorway. That was kind of like a S kind of doorway, and so I finally got it out there. I hired piano movers to move it and put it in a U-Haul, and brought it down to New Orleans.
You drove it yourself?
I didn't. I had a friend of mine that I brought down from Canada, and he drove it with Jimmy Mack, the guy and so I flew back. So because I was sick.
So what records were made at Kingsway with you there?
So kind of the first ones. There was a guy called Chris Whitley. I'm not sure if you know.
Great record.
Yeah, great.
And again, interesting. It makes sense because the ambience of Chris Whitley's record jumped
Suited
out.
that, yeah.
And he actually, because I think he was signed to Sony,
Yeah.
Columbia back then, or Epic. He got a good look. He got a good push from
Yeah.
that.
Oh,
That
we
record
had
got some traction.
a lot of traffic come and listen to it, but Dan was kind of pissed off because he told Chris that he wouldn't produce his record, and that Malcolm Byrne should produce his record, and so we made this record, and it sounds really great because
Did Malcolm end up producing?
Yeah, Malcolm produced it, and I recorded and mixed some of it, and but Dan got mad maybe because it was his band. We were using Daryl Johnson on bass and
Sahib.
Yeah, and it sounded killer, like these guys can really play.
Oh yeah.
And you got this white kid from Texas or New York and with a dobro, and that was the sound,
Right.
So you had this kind of cool groove against this Texas blues type of thing. So it worked, and so he was pegged for the next kind of big thing, And so after that, REM had come through the doors, and so that was with
Kingsway.
At Kingsway, yep. So that would have been a record called Automatic for
the
People.
Great record.
Yep.
One of the best.
Yep. And so then Robbie Robertson had come through the door with a record called Storyville. And I think I recorded more people in 2 days than I had in my whole life.
Robbie brought all his people?
He came in, we used the brass band, and we had strings, and we had singers, and they were all lined up in the kitchen, and then once these were done, the next people would come in, and Gary Gersh was the producer at the time.
Really?
And it's like, I'm second day, and I'm sweating, and I'm just exhausted. And I said, Gary, this is killing me, I've been, recording so many people. He goes, this is nothing. I've been doing this for a year. So it was
working on Robbie's record?
You're working on Robbie's record, yeah. So it was
I didn't know Gersh produced that.
Yeah. That was the second record.
Wow.
And so Dan, produced the Robbie's first. I guess it was called Robbie.
I love that record.
Yeah. So
Quick story about that record about A&M Records. I'm interviewing for A&M Records. I have to interview with 6-8 different executives. The last one, and it's a cauldron of just trying to get through them all. And the last one is a guy named Michael Leon, God rest his soul. And he says, all this stuff is great, but what are you listening to? What's your favorite record today? And I say, today? I said, I love the Robbie. I can't stop listening to Robbie Robertson record. And he says to me, that's my favorite too. You hired.
Oh wow!
But yeah, that was
got good taste.
Yeah, no, that is still to this day. I go back and listen to it all the time.
Yeah.
And the ambience of the record is what you guys have built the sound from Yellow Moon to No Mercy to all these records. It's just they jump off, they jump out.
Yeah.
Not in a loud way, but they just they get you.
It's I call it depth. You can reach into these mixes, there's things that are really far away, but then there's things in your face, and things pan to one side, or a drum set is on one side and the bass is on the other side. They're really created in a way that not just like a rock record, straight up. And so I think that's the charm in all these records when you listen to them.
And how much would you say New Orleans as a whole in the sound has a character? Is a character in these records? What would how would you surmise that?
I would say it by starting here and working with the drummers here, the rhythms, it made it hard for us to make records with other people.
Right.
Because the rhythm.
They're just better.
It's just, you can't get a guy in Canada, a white guy, to play drums that has any kind of soul or feel.
Right.
It's just doom bop, it's like straight ahead kind of thing. So when I made this record with a band, Tragically up in Canada, I brought them down to New Orleans.
That's right.
And so to give them some flavor, I had this little kid that we discovered called Brian Blade come in and play with Johnny. And then we had 2 kits, and we created...
Brian Blade gave some lessons, put on a clinic, huh?
Oh my God, it was incredible. And the band was just like in awe of it. And it was like, wow, this is incredible. And so this is kind of like how I made this kind of like record for them. And the record company didn't get the sound of it because, I was all textural. And, there was beautiful pieces in there that they'd never even discovered before as a band,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think they really discovered that later, that this may be one of their best records. And, because everything else is kind of like, meat and potatoes rock,
So, again, we could probably do a 4-part series on you, but obviously you spent how much time at Kingsway?
I wasn't there as long as I thought I was. So from 1990 to 1993.
3 years in New Orleans.
3 years in New Orleans, and I made all those records, and Iggy Pop was part of it, and Sarah McLachlan started there.
Wow.
And so there was a lot of traffic that came through before Dan and I, we left to start another chapter. And
what was the decision to make a move out?
I'm not afraid to talk about it, but there was a woman involved. And
there's always a woman involved, people.
And Dan got involved with this woman, and she was a kind of a voodoo.
Here locally.
Here.
Oh, I remember the story.
Yep. So
and it was not a good scene, and it was time to go.
It was time to go, and so she took him to court, and he did not like that, and he spent a lot of money. And
so it's safe to say, if that didn't happen, you might have stayed for more time.
We may have. We were planning, like after Bob Dylan's record, Dan had this idea, he wanted to go to Mexico. And so that, so did I. I thought, what a great place to do it. And so it ended up, we got sidetracked, and Barbara Hoover convinced him to buy this house. And it turned into, he let her buy a bunch of furniture for the house. And then so she ended up, she ended up getting in between a lot of people,
Drama.
Yeah,
drama.
and it's like she would go up to you and say, you know what, Mark said that you're not a good guy. And she'd go up to you and say, you know what, Mark said about you. And so next thing we're mad at each other,
Right, she was that person. Right?
So, but she couldn't get into my world because, I didn't have anything that she could pin on me. So I was kind of, I knew her, and so, but she got involved with the people in the studio and Dan's brother, and he believed her, and it just turned into a mess. And so, so that's...
Is that when you went to Oxnard?
No, we didn't go. We went to, after that, we did a tour and ended up in California. And I ended up in Encinitas, California. And,
good place.
Beautiful surf town. And so I ended up putting a studio up together. I brought in a matchless console that was in a road case, and I had a 24-track tape recorder sent from New Orleans and put it in a road case. And so I was shipping all this stuff down to Baja, Mexico, to this place, not Cabo San Lucas, but between Cabo and
La Paz?
I guess it's, what's the other town called? Jose
del Cabo.
Yeah. So between there is a barrier, and so this guy built his house into the rocks overlooking the Sierra Cortez, and so it was like all natural rock, but the ceiling was all palapa, grass roof, and then there was glass windows that accordioned open that looked over the sea and stuff like that. And there was like, it was like a James Bond villa, like there was a pool that went in through the windows and went into the bedroom. And it was like.
And what records did you make there?
A record never really came out of there other than a lot of instrumental stuff. And so we spent a year down there kind of like looking at a bunch of stuff we recorded, and we brought Brian Blade down and Daryl Johnson, and so a lot of stuff that I had kind of like reviewed some shows and stuff like that, and I was doing these treatments on Brian's drums and treating them, and I have like all these multiple effects, and so I was like, so I was like kind of making drum loops, I guess you would call it, in the day. And so that kind of turned into a lot of music that was used in a film that I did called Sling Blade with Billy Bob Thornton. So yeah, oh, French fried potatoes.
Love that one.
Yeah. So we thought it was like a cute little art film, you know. And it's like, so you know, I kind of got put in the spot where, you know, I knew Dan's archive, and I knew it was all on DAT tapes and stuff like that. So I just put pieces of music against it.
Did you guys do the score for that movie?
Yeah.
Oh, so you're able to find it all?
Yeah. So I kind of like found it all, and then they would say, "Oh, that's good. Let's use that." And so I kind of like assembled it as they sat on.
What a great experience!
Yeah. So it was pretty cool. And so after Mexico, then we ended up in Joshua Tree, and I had a friend that had this studio called Rancho de la Luna in Joshua Tree, and that's the studio that a lot of those.
Is that the U2 record?
No, the U2 was only photographed in Joshua Tree. They had never recorded there.
Interesting.
But you know, Josh Holmes and and all those guys. That's where they all ended up.
Yeah.
And so I set up the studio in there, and my friend that owned the place, and
Josh Homme, you talking about?
Yeah. And so a lot of those records, those heavier records, came out of there after us, and so I was the first one in, kind of like, and then I moved to San Francisco, and I rented a warehouse there, and that's kind of where I finished Emmylou Harris's Wrecking Ball. In this
Good record.
Yeah, beautiful record. And then you know, I was kind of going back between L.A. and San Francisco, and I had this beautiful Jaguar, and I just drive up the coast in it, and so I got to Oxnard after coming back from a meeting. I saw this old wrecked kind of, well, I didn't know it was wrecked at the time, but it was just like a theater, and it just said, you know, for lease or whatever. And so I, you know, took the number, and when I got to San Francisco, I called it, and it was like $1,500 a month. It was cheap, and I told Dan about it, and he said, okay, well, maybe that would be a good spot for our next place. And so I had an assistant at the time. His name was Wayne Lorenz, and I said, Wayne, you're going to go to Oxnard, you're going to take out all the seats, and you're going to paint all.
Now you're basically signing people to go do the work, right?
Yeah. So he goes down there. I buy him a pickup truck, and he stays at my friend's place up in Ojai, and so he takes all the seats out, and because he's Canadian, he's like, he knows how to build a deck. And so he built this huge deck in the middle of the cinema, and that was the control room, and you know, everything was all spread around like a horseshoe, so you can get in behind the gear, and the drums, and you know, the organ, pianos. It was all mic'd, so if you walked over to the piano and started playing, I'm in record. Like, I don't have to set anything up. Wow. And so that's kind of like when Dylan came through, like he would play something, and I'd already recorded it. So.
And which record was it?
That was for Time Out of Mind.
That's Time Out of Mind.
Yep.
And what kind of players did you have on that record?
It started, he had this idea that he wanted to make a record like Beck. And so...
Bob's imitating Beck, huh?
Yeah, so Dan says, well, you know, we do that. We do loops. We do all that stuff, you know. We can pull that off for you. And so it started off with this record that he wanted me to mix for... he'd done this show in Atlanta, Georgia, to do with the Olympics, and he did like the House of Blues show, and they recorded. So he wanted me to mix it for a Japanese release or something like that. And so while I'm doing that, you know, he would come in every day and, you know, drive up in his pickup truck to Oxnard, and he'd just walk around the streets because nobody knows him. And it's all like...
But it's a heavy migrant. Let's set it up. It's a heavy migrant.
Mexican,
Yeah,
restaurants.
there's lettuce, there's stuff being grown, and there's tons of migrant workers bringing produce into the world.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And otherwise, there's not much going on in Oxnard.
No. And so he was able to kind of come in there. But I said, Bob, look, don't go in the pool hall. The pool hall is full of some sketchy guys. I don't want you to get beat up or anything like that. And where does he go?
Pool hall.
Pool hall. And so yeah, so it was kind of like that's kind of how it started, and so I was mixing this live record for him, and it comes up to the very last song, and Bob goes, "There's harmonica on this song, and can you make it sound electric?" And I said, "Oh yeah, no problem." So I take it a line off the tape recorder, and I put it through a little Ibanez tube screamer distortion pedal, and then into a little tweed amp. And sure enough, there's a little Walter sound, like really cool distorted harmonica sound. And so when he finishes his harmonica part, he sings. He starts singing into the same mic. So Bob hears his voice come through this distortion out of this amp. He goes, "Oh man, I love that. That's great. I want you to do that on every vocal on this record."
This is on the live record?
On the live record. So I had to remix the whole live record with this.
You created your own monster there.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So, but it's the thing that started Time Out of Mind. That's his vocal sound. So I started.
So you got that sound
Yeah.
for him, and then he took it and ran with it.
Ran with it, and so we called it the vocal amp. And like I had a vocal amp on one channel, and then like I had a clean version of his vocal on the one channel, and he'd always come up to me and goes, "Mark, what's the percentage?" I go, 60-40. He goes, "Make it 50-50." So I'd bring the distortion out. So
He loved it.
Yeah, so he loved it. It all kind of started when he drove up to Oxnard. He would get this radio station of that only played old blues, like Little Walter and Muddy and all these things. And so he came to me one day and he goes, "Why can't my record sound like that?" I said, "It can. We just got to approach it from an older style of recording." Sure. And so I used ribbon mics and old preamps and stuff like that. And so that's kind of like how it started. And then it was great. Bob would come in every day while I was mixing, and he'd play a bit on the piano, and he'd go to Dan and he goes, "What do you think of that song?" And Dan would say to him, "Oh, that's great, but I'd need to hear some lyrics." And so the next day Bob would come in and he'd play the piano again, and go, "Daniel, what do you think of this song?" He goes, "Oh, I love this one, but I need to hear some lyrics." And so the third day or whatever, he comes in and he plays the piano and he starts to sing, "I Can't Wait," and he's playing this piano part that's gospel, and he's singing "I Can't Wait." And we had this friend of ours from New York in the studio with us, this guy Tony Mangorian, and he's a hip-hop drummer from New York. And so he starts playing this hip-hop beat against this gospel vibe with him singing "I Can't Wait," and it was one of those times with the hair.
Goosebumps?
Yeah, you get that hair coming up going, "Oh my God, this is the thing."
Right.
And so that was kind of like how it was starting, and I thought, this is great. Everything sounds amazing. And then Bob calls and says, "I can't work this close to home. I think we should go to Miami." So I had to move all this gear into a truck and motorcycles.
He needed to be away, huh?
Well, I think he needed to be away from the family.
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Too much drama.
Yeah.
Well, look, we got so much to talk about, but I think we'll have to do it again. But
yeah.
Just real quick, so these two books, this is all about the studios, right? That you used, created these studio spaces all over the world, and that's really become your MO as a producer. You don't really work in traditional recording studios. You make recording studios, which not a lot of people do. I think it's a fascinating thing. But if you want to know more about this, Recording Icons is the book. And then talk about Listen Up. Yeah,
so Listen Up is kind of behind the curtain in the studio, the things that happen. Recording process is never really an exciting thing. Like, you plug a microphone in and it's like, whatever.
Right.
It's the things that happen around that,
Sure.
Like I had 3 pianos in a row for Oh Mercy record with Bob Dylan, and Dan was thinking about buying one of them. So Bob would always go to the Baldwin piano instead of the 2 Steinways that I had there. Dan was going up to Bob why do you always go to the Baldwin piano? Does it have better action than the Steinway? I want to buy one of these. And Bob turns around to him and says, "No, I play in the Baldwin because it's the only one that had a stool."
And on that note, Mark Howard has incredible stories. His books are fantastic. Really great deep dive in the legacy of recording with icons and many of other people. Obviously, New Orleans is a big feature in his life. It really started his career.
Yep.
And then he was a good soldier in bringing bands like the Tragically Hip to town to record. But if you want to know more, check out these books because they're really amazing. So thank you, Mark, for showing up and being with us on Friday's Offbeat.
Both books are available on Amazon, so you can...
Boom! Buy books. They're good for you.
Yep.
All right, y'all.
Okay.
See you next time.
Thank you.